and welcome to Hilltop Stovetop, the show where we teach you how to make great meals in an ordinary kitchen. Today we're going to be tackling using up some of those turkey leftovers that we talked about. Now you'll notice that once again we're dealing with just one camera as a continuation of our COVID physical distancing. So bear with me while I move all the cameras around. Now, and hopefully that you've continued to like and subscribe so that we won't be missing out on any of the future episodes as we go along. So, speaking of episodes, if you recall, about 3 or 4 episodes ago, maybe even more than that now, we roasted a turkey in anticipation of all of the holiday meals that you're going to be having. And when we did the episode where we were carving the turkey, I said that it was very important that you leave some meat on the bones because that was going to be the basis of our turkey and dumplings and also our turkey soup. But the other thing I said was, don't worry about doing that all on the same day that you've just cooked this giant turkey dinner. Wait a little while, just take the whole carcass and put it in the freezer, and then on another day when you've got some time, you can start to work on it. And time is an important thing when you're doing any of these dishes where you need to be creating the stock and you're getting the meat to loosen up from the bones, because it takes 2 or 3 hours of simmering for the joints to loosen and the meat to fall off the bones. So it's not the kind of thing that you want to do when you're just dashing home from work and want a quick supper. So I have here today the remnants of my turkey. It actually filled in two bags was the easiest way to put it. And we're going to start by just putting those in a big pot of boiling water. And we're going to add in some bay leaves. Now, bay leaves are one of these things, you kind of look at them and stew and you wonder what they're all about. And they're very, just a dried leaf. They do add nice flavor to a lot of meat dishes, particularly stews. But the other thing about them is they add in the tenderizing process for any kind of stew type dish. So we're going to throw a few of those in the pot with the boiling water. The one thing about bay leaves is you leave them whole, you don't crush them up, because they do have a fairly sharp edge to them. So when you're finished cooking, you want to take these out before you serve a plate full of stuff. The edges of these, this stuff doesn't break down, so they're really hard to digest if somebody was to try to actually eat one of these. It's strictly for the tenderizing properties and the flavor that we're adding this. Okay, so here we have our pot of water. Now throw in the bay leaves. Depends on the size they are, minimum 2, maybe a few more. And when we put all of this turkey into the bags, I just broke it up into pieces so it was manageable. But you notice I still have the herbs that were in there when I roasted it in the first place. So we're leaving those herbs in there. They eventually will come out before we serve this. But we might as well leave them in and get a little bit more of their frozen flavor out of that. And we also have things like the end of the drumstick where we carved the meat off of that. And we've got the wings. And we have all of the skin as well. Now eventually we'll take that skin off once this is all boiled down. But for now, that's a good start, and will actually help with the browning and the good coloration of this stock. So we've got that totally covered with water, and then I'm going to put the lid on that, and take one of my cute little men here, and put him in underneath there, so that keeps it from boiling over. And we'll get this pot up to where the the water is actually boiling and simmering and that meat is all hot. And then we'll turn it down just to a slow simmer and let it cook away for a couple of 3 hours until we start to see that meat dropping off the bones. So now, folks, here we are with the wonders of modern technology. We have fast-forwarded several hours of simmering time, and the turkey bones that we'd put into and the turkey bones that we'd put into the that boiling water have simmered for several hours until they reached a point where when we kind of poked away at it, the joints in the turkey come apart. And it doesn't matter what kind of, whether it's turkey or chicken or whatever, you want that same kind of thing, so where the bones are starting to come apart. And there was very little fat on the top of this. If I was cooking something that had a lot of fat, at this point, when it's cooled down, it'd be easy to skim a lot of that fat off. So now what we need to do is I've got a big bowl and a colander. Now, if I didn't have these things, I'd just use a slotted spoon and gradually pick stuff up out of the broth. But since I have this is the way I'm going to do it. I'm just going to pick up the whole works, and this is where it's important to let it cool first, because we are going to be working with these bones. And I'm going to dump the whole works in there. Whoa. And that just leaves just a little bit in the bottom. Too bad I couldn't do that towards the camera, but I'm not facing the right direction for that. Okay, now with this, we have two things that we can make. We can make the turkey and dumplings that we're going to do today. This is also how you would start with the turkey soup. Usually what I do is I make the turkey and dumplings one day, and then the next day I make the soup out of the leftovers. Again, depending on the circumstances. If I've got a cold or something and I really want some chicken soup or turkey soup, I just take a little frying chicken and cook it up in the slow cooker and do this process. And the same as if I know somebody who's got a cold, that's what I'll do. So I've got my pot that I'm going to make the turkey and dumplings in. Important thing about this is that we get a pot that has a really tight-fitting lid. And this is the same system that we used when we made the blueberry grunt last week, where once we get this all cooking, we're going to steam it. But what we're going to start with is basically a thin stew. So I'm going to put this on kind of a medium-high heat to start with, put a little bit of olive oil in the bottom. And I'm going to start my celery and onions cooking while I'm peeling off some of the meat in anticipation of making this. So I pre-chopped all of this stuff just because that keeps me from crying on air. And Coco's here to help. With not having Jim here to film, Coco's not getting as many of her glamour shots as she's used to. But she still is keeping tabs because she knows that there's a system to how I do this turkey. So I've got a couple of things here. First off, I have a garbage bag here, and that's because the bones are going to go straight into the garbage. The meat is going to go into the pan that I'm cooking with, and the skin and that sort of the skin and the cartilage is going to go in this bowl here for the dog. And if you don't have a dog, well, then the whole works has to go into the garbage, I'm sorry to say. And so we're going to take out the bay leaves as we go along. as I mentioned when we started this cooking process, they don't break down, and you can see that they've held their shape totally, and even when you break them, they have quite a sharp edge to them when you break them, so we don't want to leave those in. And we're going to start by taking the bigger chunks of meat, or sorry, the bigger chunks of bone out, and that'll give us a bit of space to work with here. And I should mention again, I did wash my hands before we started this whole process, because I haven't figured out a way to do this other than to get my hands into it. Now we've got little bits like this that the dog will love, and then right away we're pulling off pieces of meat. So I'm going to start putting those pieces of meat into here. And you have to keep your wits about you, because sometimes if you get bored, you can start throwing the bad stuff in with the good and vice versa. And most of this just breaks apart. You don't even need a knife to do it. It will break apart in your hands. And I'm sure if I was doing turkey anatomy, I'd be able to name all of these parts, but I'm not going to bore you with that. And I think that we've got as much out of those as we possibly can. So there we've got a close-up of the turkey and the onions and the celery just starting to simmer. And we're going to keep doing that until the celery and the onions have started to soften a bit, and then we can start adding some of the broth to this. So oddly enough, some of the best meat that we're going to get off of this is the wings. And if you remember back to the episode where we were carving the turkey, and I said, unless you had somebody in your family that specifically loved the wings, that we weren't going to bother carving those, because this is where we get the benefit of all the meat on the wings. And one of the reasons that I keep this garbage bag handy is as soon as we're done, I'm going to take this whole thing out and put it straight to the outdoor garbage, because there's something about poultry bones that if you just put them in the kitchen garbage right now and then you waited, even by tomorrow morning, it would stink like crazy. There's something about it that seems to have an awful smell very quickly. Now the advantage to doing this a few days after Christmas is, of course, you've got the time and probably a little bit more energy. The disadvantage is if you had a small turkey like we had and you don't have very much meat on it, you can't just go to your stock of leftovers, because those are now long gone. The sliced turkey that we had as leftovers, I've used in several different meals since then, and there isn't any left to add to this. But we'll get by, because we have enough vegetables to keep us going quite well. I'm going to give this another stir, and I think that that's nicely started to soften. So now I'm going to take a ladle and I'm going to lift this whole colander out. And I'm just going to pop it over onto my other bowl. If I didn't have that other pot there, I would put it onto a plate or something so it's not running all over the counter. Then I have to remember that this pot is hot. There we go. So we'll get that simmering away a bit.
Okay, and then go back to our turkey and see, we've got all kinds of stuff like the skin that if you're on a low-fat kind of diet, you might want to avoid that. But on the other hand, if you're somebody that's into some of the keto stuff, you're probably going, the skin is the best part. Everybody's got their own favorite parts. And as we get close to the end of this turkey, oh yes, Coco. Okay, I'll give you a little more. As we get close to the end of getting the meat off of this, that's when we sort of assess how many people we're going to be serving and what other goodies we need to add. So if this was just right after the holiday meal, whether it be Christmas or Thanksgiving or whatever it might be, when I'm making this, I would just take all of the leftover vegetables. I'd take the turnips and the potatoes and the sweet potatoes and just every little bit of stuff that's in the back of the refrigerator that's left over. And I'd put it into this, basically a very soupy stew that we're making. But since I don't have all of those leftovers, I have the next best thing. And this is something that I discovered at our other grocery store in town, the Foodland. It's their Compliments brand, and it's called, I'll try to get a close up here, it's called Vegetable Mix for Soup. And I'm just going to go around to the back of the camera to make sure that I've got this right here. There we go. Vegetable soup, or vegetable mix for soup. So this is got everything in it that you could possibly think of. It's got carrots, celery, turnips, onions, parsnips, and leeks. So I know I added extra onions and celery, but that's just because I like a lot of those in this soup. But I always keep a package of this in my freezer, because that way if I get the urge to make a pot of soup for myself or for somebody else, I've got that nice mix. It's all chopped, everything's all the same size, so it cooks evenly, and it makes my life way easier. So I've got that stuff simmering away there. Just going to open this up. And this particular one has been in my freezer for a little bit, so it is kind of frozen together, but that's okay. By the time we're done, that will all be just nicely simmered in there. Going to add a little bit more broth to this. And, I think that one more will do. Sure, there we go. I'm going to give you a close-up of that so you can see how delicious it looks already, and it's not even fully cooked yet. And once it's warmed up and those vegetables have had a chance to blend their flavors a little bit, I'm going to give it a taste. I'll probably add some soy sauce to it and some pepper, and I can certainly add some more sage and parsley, the same, or sage and poultry seasoning, the same seasonings that I used when I was making the turkey dinner, because that's essentially what this is. It's got everything that you would have in a Christmas dinner or a Thanksgiving dinner all in one pot. The other thing that I'm going to add to this is I have some leftover mashed potatoes, and I'm just going to throw that in, and that'll kind of thicken up the stock a little bit and add some nice extra flavor to that. And while this is simmering away, I'll actually just put a lid on this and let that continue to simmer away. And then I'm going to move the camera over, and we're going to start making up the batter for the dumplings. We're back at our turkey and dumpling mixture here, this kind of the stewy mixture. And this has been simmering for about half an hour. So that's given the all the vegetables that are in here a chance to cook up. And you'll notice that the broth is quite a bit thicker, and that's because I added, it was about, I'm going to say it was 3 cups of leftover mashed potatoes that I just happened to have in the fridge. And that's like anything that we're doing here, it's just whatever you happen to have in the fridge. And again, this is one where, other than for the dumplings, I'm not going to put a recipe in there. I'm going to let you, as the cook, decide what is available in your household. If you wanted to make this a strictly vegetarian dish, you could do that. But traditionally it's either chicken and dumplings or turkey and dumplings, but it could be a beef stew even, for that matter. Okay, so now next test is we're going to taste test this and find out what kind of seasonings we need to add to this. And this is really hot, so we got to be careful. And it's a little on the bland side. So what we're going to do is I'm going to add some pepper. Give it a little kick. And instead of adding salt, I'm going to add some soy sauce to this. And soy sauce is going to give it a little bit of salty flavor, but it's also going to make it look a little more appetizing because it's going to make it a little browner broth to it. And then the third thing that I'm going to add is a little bit of my old friend, the Better Than Bouillon. In this case, I only have the turkey, or sorry, I have the chicken one, not the turkey one, but nobody will be the wiser. If you don't have this stuff, again, you can use bouillon cubes. This just, because it's in a paste form, it incorporates very, very quickly. I don't end up with a little lump of something. And I also find that it's not too salty. Depending on the brand of cube that you have, sometimes they can be a little bit salty, in which case you'd have to pare back on the soy sauce that you were adding. So we'll get that all incorporated, and then we'll taste again and see where we stand. Oh, much better. Okay, so now we're ready for the final bit. So first off, we want to make sure that this is at a good simmer. So I've got it at about medium heat. We can see that there's little bubbles coming up in there. All right, so now we're back over to our prep area where we're going to be mixing up the batter for the dumplings. We're starting off with 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour. And we're going to add 2 teaspoons of baking powder. Now, again, for my subscribers that live in areas where there's self-rising flour, you wouldn't need to also add the baking powder. But for those of us in North America, this is what we need to do. And we're going to add a little bit of salt. If I can get it open, we will. And it calls for about 1/4 teaspoon. And that's one of those things that it adds some interest to the flavor. And it also does help a bit with the leavening, how it puffs up as we go along. Now we're going to add 3 tablespoons of shortening. Now for this sort of thing, I prefer to use butter. It adds a little more depth to the flavor, but it also, if we were doing something where things are going to brown, which isn't so much in this particular dish, but if I'm making biscuits and things like that, having the butter helps to brown it. So I'm just going to move this off to the side. So I have here my dish of butter, and if you remember from the when we were talking about the pie crust, a block this size, 1 pound, is 2 cups. So that's 1 cup, that's 1/2 cup, and that's 1/4 cup. and 1/4 cup is 4 tablespoons. So just for ease of measuring, I'm going to take half of that. That's 2 tablespoons. And half of this one was another 1 tablespoon, and my math is hopefully right. It says that that should be about 3 tablespoons. And then we put that into the butter and baking powder mixture. And the same thing that we did with the pastry and with the blueberry grunt, except this is just such a small amount of fat. It's going to mix in there really, really quickly. And we won't have the same granular kind of texture that we did with the pastry. It'll be much drier. This is just to get that fat incorporated in it, and it's very, very, very quick. There, so that's done. Now the last thing that we're going to add to this is 3/4 cup of milk, but I'm not going to add that until we're ready to put it into the turkey mixture, because if I added it right now, that would start the baking powder working and get things all puffed up before it was cooking, and that wouldn't work very well. So now we're just waiting for things to simmer, and I'm going to go wash my hands again. Okay, so we've got our dry ingredients for the dumpling mixture, and we've got the milk. I'm going to add that all in one shot and mix it up. Just the same as we did for the blueberry grunt. Same principle here. We don't want to mix it any more than necessary, because that can lead to a certain toughness with a baking powder based mixture. We just want to make sure that we've got all of the dry ingredients mixed in. And then we're going to go to our stew. And the first thing you want to do is give it a good stir, because when we put this mixture into the stew, a really good point is to make sure that you've got it landing on something solid, not straight into the liquid. Because if it goes into the liquid and it drops down before it has a chance to fluff, that's where you can end up with some rocks in the bottom, I'll say, instead of nice fluffy dumplings. So we find a little corner of vegetable and drop a bit onto it. This is a little thicker dough than what the blueberry grunt was. And as this cooks, it's going to absorb a certain amount of the liquid. What's in here? There we go. And now we're going to set the timer for 10 minutes, because this is a 2-stage cooking process. And the other thing that I'm going to do is, you notice this is again kind of a bland coloring. So I'm going to take just a little bit of the sage that we would use when we were cooking our holiday dinner and just give it a little sprinkle on top. And likewise, I'm going to take some finely ground black pepper, just a hint of that. There. And now we wait 10 minutes, and then we're going to put the lid on it and wait another 10 minutes. Okay, so we're about 8 minutes into the cooking time, and you can see how everything has fluffed up quite a bit. When we first put this in, there was gaps in between the dumplings, and now it's covering the whole surface area. And it was really important that we have everything really hot to start with, because otherwise the bottoms of the dumplings wouldn't be cooked before the top was cooked. So we're just off of that 10-minute mark, and once we hit the 10 minutes, then we are going to put the lid on it, and we're going to cook it for another 10 minutes to get the top done. And again, because this is a little bit heavier dough than the blueberry grunt was, plus it's a bigger dumpling, it does take that little bit of extra time to cook. And timing on these things is really quite critical. It's not something that you can do half of it and then come back to it. Okay, so there's our 10 minutes. I'm going to pop the lid on it. I am going to reduce the temperature a little bit. That is boiling quite heavily. And then I'm going to put the timer on for another 10 minutes. And at the end of the 10 minutes, it'll be time to call everybody down for dinner. All right, folks, so we're about a minute off of our 10 minutes. And luckily for everybody involved, I have a glass top to my pots so that you can see that these things are still simmering away and have continued to grow in size. But timing is everything, so we're going to wait the extra 35 seconds because if you take this out just a little bit too soon, we could end up with some gummy middle to these things. And you don't want that. You want a fluffy middle. You don't want a gummy middle. It smells great. Once again, I wish the camera had an olfactory sensor on it so that you guys could tell how wonderful this smells. Three, two, one. There we go. Okay, now keeping in mind, as I already demonstrated, this pot is hot. So we're just going to lift off that lid. And there we go. Perfect. Now's the time to turn off the burner. And this is one of these things that is incredibly hot, but everybody wants to tuck into it really quickly, just like they did with the blueberry grunt. So I'm going to lift off one of these puppies here. So there we go. We've got a beautiful dumpling, and it's a soupy kind of stew. One of those meals you're not sure if you want a fork or a spoon. So thank you for joining us today for our episode of Turkey and Dumplings. I hope that you enjoyed this and that you'll continue to like and subscribe, particularly on YouTube. And if there is something in particular that you would like to see demonstrated, add something in the comments and I'll see what I can do to accommodate. I've already had a couple of episodes where people have requested that specific dish. And what I'm going to do right now is to just show you what the inside of this dumpling is like. I'm just going to cut into that, and it's basically like a little biscuit on the inside. So you can see it's nice and light and fluffy, but it's cooked all the way through, so that's important. So thank you very much for joining us, and I'm going to go eat my dinner now. Thanks very much. Bye-bye now.